Marcus settled into his first-class seat 2A, specifically chosen for its legroom so he could work during the flight. As a platinum member of Skylux Airlines, he had done everything right, booked early, paid in full, and arrived on time. Yet his presence was about to become a problem. "There seems to be a mistake, sir. We need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger," Jessica, the flight attendant, said, her tone condescending despite the polite words. "The seat is reserved for only our platinum members. You don't belong and can't sit here." Behind her stood Karen Wickfield, an elegantly dressed white woman tapping her designer watch impatiently. Her eyes darted between Marcus, the black man, and seat 2A, which she clearly considered her rightful place. "I always sit there. It's practically my seat," she muttered just loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Marcus looked up, confusion crossing his face. He calmly reached for his wallet and produced his platinum member card. "I am a platinum member," he replied evenly, "and this is my assigned seat." The flight attendant's smile tightened. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by determination. "I understand, sir, but this particular seat is typically reserved for a better customer," she said, pointing to Karen Wickfield, our regular platinum member who flies with us frequently. The implication was clear. Regardless of his status, Marcus didn't belong in that seat. Passengers began to notice. Phones slowly emerged. The whispers started. What the flight crew didn't know was that this simple act of discrimination would change everything in the next few hours, not just for them, but for the entire airline. Because the person they underestimated held their fate in his hands. The man they underestimated. Marcus wasn't just any passenger. At 42, he was the founder and CEO of Ritech Solutions, a $2.8 billion AI company specializing in customer service technology. His software helped companies identify and eliminate bias in their customer interactions. Ironic, considering what was about to unfold. Marcus's story began long before his success. Growing up in South Chicago, he taught himself to code at just 11 years old on a second-hand computer. While other kids played video games, Marcus built them, creating simple programs that eventually evolved into complex algorithms. His path wasn't easy. When Marcus was 16, his father was killed in an attack that shook his community. Standing at his father's grave, young Marcus made a promise that would define his life: to make people see each other as human beings first. That promise fueled to decades of relentless work, starting his company in a tiny apartment. Marcus coded for 18 hours a day while working odd jobs to pay rent. Earlier that day at the airport, security cameras captured Marcus helping an elderly woman struggling with her luggage, patiently assisting her to find her gate. He held doors open for strangers, thanked every service worker by name, and tipped generously at the airport cafe, not because he was being watched, but because that's who Marcus Richardson was. Humble despite his success, kind despite his power. Now he was traveling to deliver the keynote address at the Global Ethics and Technology Conference. The confrontation escalates. "Sir, we have a platinum member who always sits in this particular seat," Jessica said, leaning down toward Marcus. "Would you mind moving to another first-class seat?" Her tone was polite, but carried an undercurrent of expectation, kind that assumed compliance was the only acceptable response. Marcus looked up from his tablet, momentarily confused. He reached for his boarding pass and showed it to Jessica. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat," he explained calmly. "I'm also a platinum member." Karen Wickfield stood in the aisle, making no attempt to hide her annoyance. Other passengers could clearly hear her when she said, "I always sit there on this route. It's practically my seat." The situation was quickly becoming uncomfortable. Several passengers were now watching the interaction unfold. Jessica shifted her weight from one foot to another, glancing nervously between Marcus and Karen. "Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another section," Jessica suggested. Her implication clear. She wasn't offering him another first-class seat. Marcus remained composed. "No thank you," he replied firmly. "I've selected this seat specifically for the leg room as I need to work during the flight." Jessica's smile tightened. She nodded curtly and walked toward the front of the cabin, where she occasionally glanced back at Marcus. What happened next was secretly caught on camera by a passenger across the aisle. Karen stepped forward, seemingly to put her bag in an overhead compartment. As she did, she slipped a folded stack of notes into Jessica's pocket with practiced discretion. "I appreciate your help with this situation," Karen whispered, just loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Jessica's face flushed as she accepted the money. In that moment, a simple seating dispute transformed into something far more sinister, a bribe to discriminate against a passenger based on appearance. The power play. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted. Trevor, the cabin's supervisor, approached Marcus's seat with the confident stride of someone accustomed to having his authority unquestioned. His posture was rigid, his expression fixed in what he likely believed was professionalism. "Sir, we need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger," Trevor announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request but a command. Marcus looked up from his tablet again, his expression calm, but his eyes revealing a weary familiarity with such encounters. "I've shown my boarding pass and platinum status," Marcus replied evenly. "This is my assigned seat." Trevor's face tightened, a muscle twitched near his jaw as he leaned in slightly, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with how things work on this airline," Trevor said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "We accommodate worthy customers who have specific preferences." By now, the confrontation had captured the attention of nearly everyone in the first-class cabin. A businesswoman across the aisle discreetly angled her phone toward the interaction, openly recording the escalating situation. Within hours, these videos would be viewed millions of times online. Karen remained standing in the aisle, her designer handbag clutched against her chest, her impatience becoming increasingly theatrical. She checked her watch dramatically before letting out an exaggerated sigh. That echoed through the cabin. "I have an important meeting right after landing," she announced to no one in particular. "I need my usual seat." "This is beyond ridiculous." The other passengers' expressions told the real story. "You should get out of the seat. He doesn't even look like someone that can afford it anyway," one of them said. Trevor, emboldened by Karen's performance, leaned down closer to Marcus. His voice dropped to a near whisper, but in the tense quiet of the cabin, his words were still audible to those nearby. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or we can make this difficult. Your choice." The threat hung in the air. A moment stretched into seconds as passengers held their breath, waiting for Marcus's response. Many people might have yielded at this point, pressure of public confrontation, the implicit threat, the desire to avoid further escalation. But Marcus Richardson wasn't most people. His calm never wavered as he looked Trevor directly in the eyes. "I'm not moving," he stated firmly. "This is my seat." 6 simple words, delivered without anger or aggression, but with absolute certainty. Trevor's face flushed red. This wasn't going according to plan. He straightened up, adjusted his uniform tie, and without another word, walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. He picked up the service phone, his back to the passengers, but his agitated gestures were visible to all. The lines had been drawn. What should have been a routine flight was about to become something none of the people involved would ever forget. The tension in the cabin was palpable as Trevor spoke urgently into the service phone. Passengers exchanged glances, some typing furiously on their phones, others watching with undisguised interest. Marcus had returned to reviewing his presentation, his calm exterior revealing nothing of what must have been going through his mind. 5 minutes passed before the cockpit door opened. Captain James Reynolds emerged, his weathered face set in a professional mask as he followed Trevor down the aisle. Jessica trailed behind them, visibly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. The captain's appearance signaled to everyone that this had moved beyond a simple seating dispute. This was now an official intervention. Captain Reynolds stopped beside Marcus's seat, towering above the seated passenger. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Sir, I understand there's a situation," the captain began, his tone measured but firm. "My crew has the authority to assign seats as needed for the comfort and convenience of all passengers." Marcus looked up at the 3 airline employees now standing over him. The power dynamic wasn't subtle. 3 standing, one seated, yet Marcus's composure never wavered. "Captain, with all respect," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I have a confirmed seat assignment and platinum status. I've selected this specific seat for the leg room I need to work during the flight. There's no policy that requires me to give up my assigned seat to another passenger who simply prefers it." Trevor's lips curled into what could only be described as a smirked expression of someone who believed they held all the cards. "Sir, if you continue to be uncooperative," Trevor interjected, "we'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight." The threat landed like a physical blow. Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise he'd shown throughout the confrontation. "Are you threatening to remove me because I won't give up the seat I paid for?" he asked, his voice reflecting disbelief. The question hung in the air, its implications impossible to ignore. What possible justification could there be for removing a passenger who was simply occupying his assigned seat? Before the captain could respond, Karen's voice cut through the tension. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, her voice rising dramatically. "I'm going to miss my connection. I have never been treated this poorly in all my years of flying." The irony of her complaint wasn't lost on the other passengers, several of whom exchanged looks of disbelief. Captain Reynolds, perhaps sensing the situation was spiraling beyond what he'd anticipated, adopted a more authoritative stance. "This is your final warning," he stated firmly. "Move to another seat or we'll call security." It was at this moment that Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. With deliberate movements, he opened his camera app and began recording. "I want to be clear about what's happening here," Marcus said calmly, his phone capturing the scene. "I'm being threatened with removal from this flight because I won't give up my assigned seat to another passenger who wants it." Trevor's face contorted with anger. He reached for Marcus's phone, his composure completely abandoned. "Recording is not permitted," he snapped, his hand dangerously close to grabbing Marcus's property. Marcus pulled his phone back just out of reach. "Actually, there's no federal law prohibiting recording on an aircraft unless it interferes with crew duties. I'm simply documenting this interaction for my own protection." The legal knowledge caught Trevor off guard. He withdrew his hand, but his expression darkened further. The next sound that echoed through the cabin was the heavy footsteps of two airport security officers boarding the plane. Their arrival marked a point of no return. The security officers moved with practiced efficiency down the aisle, following Trevor's gesturing hand directly to Marcus's seat. The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to have faded away. As all attention focused on the confrontation, Marcus remained seated, his posture straight, his expression composed despite the humiliation being inflicted upon him. His phone continued recording from where he had placed it on his lap. "Sir," the first security officer began, "we've been informed there's a situation requiring your removal from the aircraft." Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the officer's presence while maintaining his dignity. "I'd like to understand the specific airline policy I'm violating," he requested, his voice clear and measured. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass and platinum status." The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was becoming increasingly obvious they had been called to remove a passenger who had violated no rules. "Sir, you need to gather your belongings and come with us," the second officer stated, avoiding the question entirely. Marcus looked directly at Captain Reynolds, who stood several feet away flanked by Trevor and Jessica. "Am I being removed for refusing to give my correctly assigned seat to another passenger?" Marcus asked directly, his question cutting through the pretense. "You're being removed for creating a disturbance," the captain replied, the words sounding hollow even as he spoke them. A murmur ran through the cabin. An elderly gentleman in the second row shook his head in disbelief, while a young woman near the back of first class wiped tears from her eyes. With quiet dignity, Marcus began gathering his belongings. He closed his tablet case, tucked his presentation notes into his briefcase, and stood slowly. Karen, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. A smug smile played at the corners of her mouth. As she watched Marcus being escorted from his center seat now, she believed, "Serves him right. He clearly doesn't belong," came a voice from somewhere in the cabin. But he didn't do anything wrong. Called another passenger. I'm recording all of this, announced a third. But despite the comments, Marcus was being removed. He walked with his head held high, his back straight, his eyes forward, the posture of a man who had faced injustice before and knew how to maintain his dignity in its face. As he passed by the row where Trevor stood supervising the removal, something happened that would later become a key piece of evidence. Karen, thinking herself unobserved, slipped another folded bill into Trevor's pocket. "Thanks for handling that situation," she whispered, her voice just loud enough to be captured by several passengers' recording phones. First class should have standards. The implication of her words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud as Marcus stepped off the plane. Escorted by security. As Marcus stepped off the plane, escorted by security, he pulled out his phone once more. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he composed a text message to his crew. "Elise, I was removed from the plane, but they picked the wrong person to humiliate." While most people would be flustered, embarrassed, or enraged after such an experience, Marcus exhibited the controlled composure of someone who had navigated these waters before. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I need you to assemble the legal team immediately." He spoke into his phone, his voice low but firm. "I've just been removed from a Skylux flight in what appears to be a textbook case of discriminatory treatment." The security officers who had escorted him off the plane lingered nearby, their initial certainty dissolving into uncomfortable realization. One officer was reviewing the incident report on his tablet, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he scrolled through the details. "Sir," the officer finally said, approaching Marcus hesitantly, "I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. The report indicates you were being disruptive, but the witness statements don't corroborate that." Marcus lowered his phone for a moment, his gaze steady as he addressed the officer. "There was indeed a misunderstanding," he replied, "but not on my part. I was sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass when I was asked to move to accommodate another passenger's preference. When I declined, I was forcibly removed." The officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner who was already backing away from the situation. They both knew they had been used to enforce something that had nothing to do with security or safety protocols. "We apologize for the inconvenience, sir," the officer offered weakly before following his partner in a hasty retreat. Marcus immediately returned to documenting the incident, recording a detailed voice memo recounting every interaction, every word spoken, every nuance of body language he had observed. As he spoke into his phone, a young woman approached hesitantly. She was clutching her carry-on bag in one hand and her phone in the other. Marcus recognized her immediately. Had been seated across the aisle from him in first class. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice tinged with indignation on his behalf. "I followed you off the plane because I couldn't just sit there and be part of what was happening. I recorded everything from the moment that flight attendant first approached you until they forced you off the plane." She held up her phone, showing Marcus the video clear, unobstructed footage that captured not only his removal, but also the damning moment when Karen slipped money to Trevor. "This was clearly discrimination," the woman continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You should have this." Marcus's expression softened for the first time since the ordeal began. "Thank you," he said with genuine gratitude. "This may be very helpful." They exchanged contact information, the woman promising to send him the full unedited video immediately and to testify if needed. What she didn't know, none of them knew, was that her video would soon be seen by millions. On the top floor of the sleek, glass-walled headquarters of Skylux Airlines, CEO Richard Williams was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang with an internal call from the Public Relations Department. "Sir, we may have a serious situation developing." The PR director's voice carried an unmistakable edge of panic. "A video is going viral showing one of our passengers being removed from a flight this morning." Williams sighed, initially dismissive. "Passengers get removed for disruptive behavior every day, Jana. Handle it with the usual statement." "Sir, this is different," the PR director insisted. The passenger was not disruptive. He was a black man in first class who refused to give up his assigned seat to a white woman. "The video shows our staff accepting cash from the woman before and after his removal." The blood drained from Williams' face as he processed the implications. "Send me the video now." As Williams watched the footage on his monitor, his expression shifted from concern to horror. Clear discrimination, the money changing hands, the dignified composure of the man being removed. It was a PR catastrophe unfolding in real time. "Who is he?" Williams demanded. "Have we identified the passenger?" There was a moment of hesitation before the PR director responded, "Yes, sir. According to the manifest, his name is Marcus Richardson." The silence that followed was deafening. "Did you say Marcus Richardson?" Williams finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. Does that name mean something to you?" Williams collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Marcus Richardson is the founder and CEO of Rytech Solutions, the same company we've been courting for a $50 million partnership. The same company that has been quietly buying our stock for the past 2 years." Miles away, in a private airport lounge, Marcus sat at the center of a rapidly assembling team. His coup, Elise Thompson, had arrived within 20 minutes of his text, bringing with her their chief legal counsel and head of corporate communications. Laptops were open, phones were buzzing, and the atmosphere crackled with focused energy. "The video has already reached 2 million views," the communications director reported, turning her screen to show the rapidly climbing numbers. "Major news outlets are picking it up now." Elise and Marcus exchanged a significant look, one that spoke of years of shared experiences and mutual understanding. "They don't know that we were already evaluating their company culture for the partnership," Elise said, her tone reflecting the bitter irony of the situation. "I guess they just gave us their authentic selves without realizing who was watching." An emergency board meeting had been convened with unprecedented urgency. Board members had dropped everything to attend, some still in golf attire, others having clearly rushed from family events. The tension in the room was suffocating as they waited for the arrival of the man who now held their fate in his hands. When Marcus Richardson finally entered, the effect was immediate and electric. Conversations ceased mid-sentence, every head turned. Despite everything he had experienced that day, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. He wore the same suit he'd been wearing when removed from the plane, a subtle but powerful reminder of the day's events. Behind him walked his executive team, Elise Thompson, their legal counsel, and 2 others whose presence would later prove crucial to the transformation that was about to begin. As Marcus took his seat, Williams used a remote to dim the lights and activate the massive screen at the front of the room. The video began to play crystal clear and devastating in its implications. Every moment was captured: the initial confrontation, Trevor's condescension, the captain's weak justifications, and most damning of all, the money-changing hands before and after Marcus's removal. When the footage ended, the room remained silent for a full 30 seconds. Several board members couldn't maintain eye contact with Marcus. Williams cleared his throat, his face ashen as he turned to address Marcus directly. "Mr. Richardson, we want to express our deepest apologies for the inexcusable treatment you experienced today. This behavior does not reflect the values of Skylex Airlines, and we—" "I'm not interested in apologies," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but resolute. The bluntness of his response sent a visible ripple through the room. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, suddenly aware that standard corporate damage control would not suffice. "As your largest individual shareholder," Marcus continued, "I have one demand and one decision. First, every staff member involved is terminated immediately. Second, I am canceling the proposed contract between my tech company and this airline." Williams glanced nervously at the board members before responding. "Mr. Richardson, while we understand your frustration, perhaps we could consider suspensions instead. Some of these employees have been with the company for many years and are union agreements." "This isn't negotiable," Marcus stated, placing his hands flat on the table. "It's accountability, or I'll pull my investment and the $50 million contract we were considering." The implications hung heavy in the air. 25% of their stock suddenly dumped on the market would be catastrophic. The loss of the $50 million modernization contract would leave them years behind their competitors. As if on cue, the boardroom doors burst open. A young financial analyst rushed in, clearly having run from another floor. He thrust a tablet toward Williams, forgetting all protocols of boardroom etiquette in his urgency. "Sir, news of the incident is already affecting our stock price," he announced breathlessly. "We're down 12% and falling. Market analysts are predicting a possible 30% drop by closing if we don't take decisive action." Williams looked from the tablet to Marcus and back again, the reality of his situation becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about the very survival of the airline. The airline would go down without Marcus, because all other investors would pull out their shares too. If he leaves, and that would make them bankrupt, the very man they removed from the plane now held the fate of the airline in his hands. 3 floors below the boardroom, in a sterile conference room devoid of luxury, Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds sat in uncomfortable silence. They had been summoned without explanation, though the growing whispers throughout the company had given them reason for concern. The HR director entered promptly at 4:30 p.m., accompanied by the company's legal counsel and 2 security officers, who positioned themselves discreetly by the door. The presence of security wasn't standard procedure for performance reviews, or even disciplinary meetings. It signaled something far more serious. "I'll be direct," the HR director began, placing 3 identical folders on the table. "Your employment with Skylex Airlines is terminated effective immediately." The statement landed like a physical blow. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Trevor's face contorted with indignation. Captain Reynolds simply closed his eyes, his weathered face suddenly looking decades older. "We were just following procedure." Trevor was the first to recover, his voice rising with each word. That passenger was being difficult and disrupting the boarding process. The HR director's expression remained impassive as she opened her laptop and turned it toward them. The now viral video began to play. Trevor's condescension perfectly captured, Jessica's discomfort evident, the captain's abdication of responsibility clear for all to see. But it was what happened next that drained the color from Trevor's face. The footage clearly showed Karen slipping money into his pocket, her words about maintaining standards audible despite her attempt to speak quietly. Was accepting money from a passenger to discriminate against another passenger procedure? The HR director asked, her tone making it clear there was no acceptable answer. Jessica broke down, tears streaming down her face. "We made a terrible mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew it was wrong even as it was happening, but I didn't stop it." Captain Reynolds, a man who had navigated through literal storms during his career, seemed unable to weather this one. "I was just trusting my crew's assessment," he offered weakly. "I didn't personally witness the initial confrontation." "You all failed in your responsibility today," the HR director stated firmly. "Not just to the company, but to basic human decency. The passenger you removed was Marcus Richardson, CEO of Ritech Solutions and our largest individual shareholder." The revelation hit them like a second blow. Jessica's crying intensified. Trevor's face, previously flushed with anger, now drained completely of color. "You will be escorted to collect your personal belongings and then to the exit." The HR director continued, "Your final pay will include 2 weeks severance, which is more than generous given the circumstances." As they were led from the room, the 3 former employees experienced what Marcus had felt earlier that day, the humiliation of being escorted out while others watched. The symmetry was both perfect and devastating. Meanwhile, in the main auditorium of Skylex headquarters, hundreds of employees had gathered for an unprecedented announcement. The CEO stood on stage, flanked by Marcus Richardson and his team. "Today, Skylex Airlines failed one of our passengers in the most fundamental way," Williams began, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "This failure wasn't just an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of systemic issues that we must address immediately and comprehensively." He gestured to Marcus, who stepped forward to explain the path forward. "Every single employee of Skylex Airlines will undergo comprehensive bias training before returning to service," Williams continued. "This training program, developed by Ritech Solutions, will become a permanent part of our onboarding and continuing education." Murmurs spread through the crowd as employees recognized the magnitude of what was being announced. A company-wide training program would cost millions and disrupt operations significantly. Marcus addressed the gathered employees directly, his voice carrying the weight of both personal experience and professional authority. "This isn't just about punishing those involved," he explained. "It's about transforming your entire culture. What happened today wasn't just wrong because I happen to be a shareholder. It would have been equally wrong if I were a teacher, a doctor, or a student traveling home." The employees listened in silence, many nodding in agreement, others looking down in shared embarrassment at what had been done in their company's name. Starting tomorrow, the CEO announced in the final powerful moment of the meeting, Skylix Airlines will implement a company-wide grounding for mandatory training. Every flight, every route, every service will be suspended for 48 hours while our entire staff participates in the first phase of this program. The gasps were audible throughout the auditorium. In an industry where minutes of delay cost thousands, a 48-hour complete shutdown was unprecedented. It would cost the airline millions, but the message it sent about their commitment to change was priceless. The long-term impact. In the weeks that followed the incident, Skylix Airlines underwent the most comprehensive transformation in its 30-year history. Conference rooms across the country were converted into training centers. Flight schedules were modified to ensure every employee from baggage handlers to the CEO himself participated in the mandatory program. The training wasn't the standard corporate checkbox exercise that employees had grown accustomed to ignoring. It was immersive, challenging, and at times uncomfortable. Employees were confronted with their own biases through sophisticated simulation exercises developed by Ritek's team of behavioral psychologists and AI specialists. Marcus made a point of personally addressing many of these sessions, standing before rooms filled with skeptical, sometimes defensive employees. "This is your opportunity to be part of the solution," he told them, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "What happened to me happens to people without my resources or platform every day. Today, we begin changing that." For some, his presence was transformative, putting a human face to what management might otherwise have dismissed as a PR crisis. For others, his willingness to engage despite his treatment demonstrated a commitment to genuine change, rather than retribution. Outside Skylix's corporate bubble, consequences continued to unfold. Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds discovered that in the digital age, accountability follows you everywhere. Their names and faces had become synonymous with discrimination in an industry where reputation is currency. Trevor sat in his apartment, surrounded by rejection emails from other airlines. "Previous experience noted, but we've decided to pursue other candidates at this time." The polite corporate language couldn't mask the real "no one wanted to hire the man." From that viral video, Jessica faced similar rejections, each one deepening her understanding of how a single decision could alter the trajectory of a career built over 8 years. During one interview that initially seemed promising, the hiring manager's expression changed the moment recognition dawned. "You're the flight attendant from that discrimination incident, aren't you?" The interview ended shortly after. Captain Reynolds, with 30 years of flying experience, found himself unable to secure even entry-level positions within the industry. His distinguished career had been reduced to those few minutes of poor judgment when he had failed to stand up for what was right. Karen Wickfield wasn't spared either. Skylix had implemented a lifetime ban, but the consequences extended far beyond her preferred airline. She sat in her living room watching news coverage of the incident, her name and actions discussed by national commentators. Her company had placed her on administrative leave pending an investigation into her conduct. Friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the woman now branded as Airline Karen. Across social media platforms, for perhaps the first time, she was forced to confront the real impact of her entitlement. Meanwhile, Skylix was implementing sweeping policy changes, new guidelines that established zero tolerance for discrimination, enhanced protocols for handling seating disputes, and protection for employees who reported misconduct. The employee handbook was rewritten to explicitly state that accepting gifts or payments from passengers in exchange for preferential treatment was grounds for immediate termination. Passengers began noticing differences almost immediately. Brief interviews captured at gates and baggage claims revealed a shifting perception. The flight attendants seem more attentive to everyone now, noted one frequent flyer. Before, it always felt like there was an invisible hierarchy based on how you looked or what you were wearing. I actually had a problem with my seat assignment, shared another passenger, but the way they handled it was completely professional. They found a solution that worked for everyone without making anyone feel less valued. As promised, Marcus gradually reinstated his investment as measurable changes were implemented and verified by independent auditors. Skylex's stock began to recover, though the road back would be long. The company's hiring practices underwent a complete overhaul, with diversity initiatives that went beyond superficial metrics to address fundamental issues of inclusion and representation. The transformation wasn't perfect or immediate. Change never is. But with each passing week, Skylex was becoming the company it had always claimed to be in its advertisements, one where everyone truly was treated like royalty. 6 months after the incident that nearly destroyed Skylex Airlines, the company was not just surviving, it was thriving. Passenger numbers had not only recovered, but increased by 12%. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. The toxic culture that had festered beneath the surface for years had been exposed to the light and was finally healing. The most surprising development came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Marcus Richardson announced a new initiative through his foundation, the Second Chance Program, designed specifically for individuals who had lost their jobs due to bias incidents. The program offered comprehensive rehabilitation training and a path back to employment. Accountability doesn't mean permanent punishment, Marcus explained at the press conference launching the program. It means earning your way back. We cannot build a more just society if we don't create pathways for those who have acknowledged their mistakes and done the work to change. Among the first participants in the program were Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds. The journey wasn't easy for any of them. The program required them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, to understand the impact of their actions not just on Marcus, but on countless others who experienced similar treatment without the power to fight back. Trevor, who had initially been the most resistant, underwent the most profound transformation. In group sessions, he spoke about growing up in a household where casual racism was the norm, about never questioning the biases he had inherited until they cost him everything. I never saw myself as prejudiced, he admitted during one particularly powerful session. I thought that because I didn't use slurs or explicitly hate anyone, I was one of the good ones. This experience has shown me how bias operates even when we don't recognize it in ourselves. Jessica's journey focused on moral courage with willingness to speak up even when it might cost you. I knew what was happening was wrong, she shared, but I was afraid of losing my job if I challenged Trevor or the captain. Now I understand that my silence made me complicit. Captain Reynolds, the oldest of the three, perhaps had the hardest road. Decades of believing he had treated everyone fairly were called into question by his actions that day. I trusted the wrong things, he reflected. I trusted hierarchy over humanity. I'll spend the rest of my career making that right, with certificates from the program in hand. Trevor and Jessica began applying for entry-level positions at different airlines. Their applications now included their StoryNet as an excuse, but as context for the growth they had undergone. The certificates didn't erase their past actions, but they demonstrated a commitment to change that some employers found compelling. Jessica was the first to secure a position, not as a flight attendant, but as a ground crew member at a regional carrier. The pay was less than half of what she had earned at Skylex, the hours were longer, and the work was physically demanding, but it was a second chance she had once thought impossible. Trevor followed a month later, starting in baggage handling at another airline. Captain Reynolds, given his age and experience, faced a different path. He wouldn't fly commercially again, but found purpose teaching in the Second Chance program, helping others understand the consequences of the kinds of decisions he had made. Skylex itself was transformed. Independent auditors confirmed what passengers had already noticed at airline now led the industry in customer satisfaction. Across all demographics, for the first time, Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern passengers reported service experiences equal to or better than those of white passengers. For the first time, Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern passengers reported service experiences equal to or better than those of white passengers, a metric that should have been standard, but had never been achieved in the industry. In a private meeting at Skylex headquarters, Marcus sat across from CEO Richard Williams, reviewing the 6-month progress report. "You've shown real change," Marcus acknowledged, closing the folder containing the latest metrics. "That deserves recognition." Williams nodded, the weight of the previous months evident in the new lines on his face. "This hasn't been easy," he admitted, "but it's been necessary. What happened to you that day forced us to confront issues we'd been ignoring for years." "That's often how change happens," Marcus replied. "Not through comfort, but through confrontation." The two men stood and shook hands, no longer adversaries, not quite friends, but partners in a transformation that was changing not just one airline, but setting a new standard for an entire industry. The story of Skylex's transformation began appearing in business school case studies around the country. What had started as a humiliating experience for one passenger had catalyzed an industry-wide reckoning with bias and discrimination. Other airlines, watching Skylex's recovery and subsequent growth, began implementing their own bias training programs, not waiting for their own public relations disaster to force their hand. 1 year after the incident, Marcus delivered the keynote address at the Global Aviation Conference. The same speech he had been traveling to give when he was removed from that flight. Standing before thousands of industry executives, he spoke not with bitterness about his experience, but with vision about the future. "The true measure of progress isn't how we treat people when we know who they are," he told the hushed audience. "It's how we treat everyone before we know anything about them at all." As he concluded his speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation, among them Richard Williams and the new executive team of Skylex Airlines. The applause wasn't just for Marcus's words, but for the tangible change his experience had sparked. In the years that followed, Marcus expanded his Second Chance program nationwide. Thousands of individuals who had lost positions due to bias incidents or discriminatory behavior found their way back to meaningful employment through rehabilitation, education, and genuine transformation. Karen Wickfield's journey took an unexpected turn as well. After months of social isolation and professional setbacks, she reached out to Marcus's foundation, requesting admission to the Second Chance program. Her initial letter was defensive, still positioning herself as partly a victim of circumstance. It was rejected. Her second letter, written 3 months later, showed the first genuine signs of reflection. "I've spent my life believing that certain privileges were my right, rather than understanding they were unearned advantages," she wrote. "I want to understand why I behaved as I did and how to become someone who contributes to solutions, rather than perpetuating problems." This time, she was accepted into the program. Her journey through it was among the most challenging documented by the program facilitators. Decades of entitlement don't dissolve easily, but Karen's transformation, while imperfect and ongoing, was genuine. Eventually, she became a speaker at corporate seminars, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about the insidious nature of privilege and the damage it causes when left unexamined. Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds each found their own paths forward. Trevor eventually worked his way back into a customer service role, though not in aviation. His experience made him particularly effective at de-escalating tense situations. With empathy rather than authority, Jessica returned to school, earning a degree in organizational psychology with a focus on workplace ethics. Captain Reynolds found purpose in retirement as a mentor to young pilots from underrepresented communities, ensuring the next generation of aviation professionals would reflect the diversity of the passengers they served. 5 years after the incident, Skylex Airlines had been completely transformed. Their training program became the industry gold standard. Their hiring practices ensured diversity at all levels of the organization. Their customer satisfaction ratings remained consistently at the top of the industry. What began as a PR disaster had become a case study in corporate transformation. At a small ceremony marking the 5th anniversary of the incident, Skylex unveiled a new addition to their corporate headquarters, a simple plaque in the main lobby that read, "Justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about progress." May we never forget that how we treat each other when no one is watching defines who we truly are. Marcus attended the ceremony not as a shareholder or business partner, but simply as a guest. As he stood at the back of the room, watching Williams unveil the plaque, a young flight attendant approached him. "Mr. Richardson," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to thank you. I was hired during the first wave of new employees after the incident. The culture you helped create here made it possible for someone like me to thrive in this industry." Marcus smiled, noticing her name tag. "Thank you, Maria. That's the best possible outcome I could have hoped for." As he left the building that day, Marcus reflected on the journey from that fateful flight to this moment. One act of discrimination, captured and confronted, had sparked a wave of change that continued to ripple outward. It wasn't perfect change, never is, but it was real and meaningful progress. In his car, Marcus opened his tablet to review his next appointment. His foundation was meeting with another major corporation that had experienced its own bias incident. The cycle would begin again: accountability, transformation, growth. It wasn't easy work, but as he had learned throughout his life, the most important changes rarely were. The story of that blithe day when karma arrived with a first-class ticket of its own continued to be shared, not just as a tale of justice served, but as a powerful reminder that sometimes the person you underestimate today might be the catalyst for your transformation tomorrow.